Chapter 5 of the Clog Shop Chronicles by John Ackworth. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Tatty Entwhistles' return. A stern, lowering look sat on the minister's face as he lifted the Clog Shop latch. He had come to Beckside on very serious business. That very forenoon a woman, agitated and tearful, and with a slight bruise on her forehead, had called at the manse in Duxbury, and had complained that her husband had struck her, and that she could no longer live with him. And this husband turned out to be none other than Nathan Entwhistle, the Beckside blacksmith, who was chapel steward and trustee in the Beckside Methodist church. The good super was grievously shocked. A humane and chivalrous man himself, he was scandalised to think of such an act being committed by a church steward. What a disgrace it would be if it got abroad, what a scandal would be caused, and what injury would be done to the name of religion. The thing must be hushed up, and the two brought together again, and if that could not be brought about, then such measures of discipline must be taken as would make it clear to all outsiders that the Church condemned, repudiated, and punished such conduct. What a beast that Nathan must be, and he had always thought him such a quiet, decent fellow, and so deeply attached to the cause too. He was very much afraid that the morals of these rough North Country folk were very lax. It was very painful, but he must do his duty. Unless Nathan repented and made full amends, he must be expelled, if only as a warning to the rest. And even if Nathan was contrite, he must be relieved of his offices. Such conduct could not be passed over. He must be faithful at all costs. These were the thoughts which were passing through the minister's mind as the venerable horse he hired jogged lazily along towards Beckside. As he entered the village, the glances and nods and winks which the villagers made to each other as he passed them confirmed him in his fears that the thing had become a public scandal. And so, after putting up his horse at the Fold farm, he came across to the Clog Shop in a stern and resolute frame of mind. Long Ben and the Clogger, who were alone, rose with joyous surprise at this unexpected call, but the look on the minister's face checked them. " Well, brethren, this is a serious matter," he said with a sigh, as he pulled off his gloves and stuffed them into his overcoat pocket, and then turning up his coat tails sat cautiously down on an old clogging bench near the fire. The faces of the two friends formed themselves into notes of interrogation. They glanced with quick inquiry at their visitor, and then at each other, and then Jabe inquired —" Wot do you mean, Mestur Shuper ?"" I mean about Nathan. Such conduct is infamous for a Christian man, and a member too. But you don't mean to say you know nothing about it?" " We knaw nowt wrung about Nathan," said Jabe slowly and decisively, " and wot's mooar, there's noabry can tell nowt nother." " If they'll speik th' truth," added Ben, whose face wore an emphatic and almost defiant endorsement of Jabe's remark. " But haven't you heard ? Is it possible you don't know what he's done ?"" He done nowt as he needs ta be shawmed on. All back," cried the Clogger doggedly. " Ashamed !" cried the super, beginning to feel that Beckside morality was laxer even than he had expected. " It is not a matter for shame, it is a matter for punishment. The law of the land punishes it, and the Church certainly cannot be below that. If all I hear be true, we shall be compelled to expel him." " Hexpel ? Ay, yo'll ha' plenty of expellin' to do if yo' starten wi' Nathan. Yo'll ha' t' expel us aw woll yo're about it." " But, Mr. Jabez, it is a misdemeanour. You cannot know what he has done to talk like that." " Well, wot has he done ?" shouted the Clogger petulantly, while both his face and that of Ben became dark with gathering storm clouds. " Done ? Why, he has struck his wife." The anger puckers suddenly straightened themselves out on the faces of the two friends. An amused, mischievous light leapt into their eyes, and after a momentary effort to control themselves they burst into a low chuckling laugh. The super was indignant. Had these men no sense of shame in them? And besides, their laughter was insulting. " And han yo' comed all the way fro' Duxbury abaat that ?" asked Jabe, when he could check himself. " Certainly, and I am pained and humiliated to see that you think so lightly of the matter. It may be Beckside morality, but it is not mine, and it is not the morality of the New Testament either." But even this sharp sally could not disturb the serene good temper into which the two cronies had laughed themselves, and after enjoying another broad grin, Jabe said —" Bless you, Mestur Shuper, yo' doan't know Beckside yet, an' Aw'm feart yo' doan't know women folk neither. Naa, tak' your coat off and hang it up upo' that peg on th' parlour door, and come and sit yo' daan while Aw tell yo' a thing or two." After getting the minister an old leathern cushion to lean his back upon against the chimney jamb, he continued —" Women, Mestur Shuper, are like dogs. The woss yo' sarve 'em, the better they like yo'. Han yo' niver noticed as aw th' scamps i' th' country has good wives as 'ull welly dee for 'em, but if yo' find a felley as is a gradely dacent chap, a bit better nor common, he's sartin to be henpecked. Well, it's o' thatunce wi' Nathan. Hoo's a dacent, hard workin' woman, but that natterin' and unyessy and discontented there's no bidin' near her. A felley as has lived with her i' this life 'ull need no purgatory i' th' next, Aw can tell yo'." Having thus got fairly going, Jabe proceeded at length to give the minister a full and particular account of the marital experiences of poor Nathan, interspersed with sententious moralisings on the ways and wiles of women. Nathan, it appeared, had been married into the teens of years. He and his wife were both members of the church at the time of their marriage, but about 3 years after, Nathan fell into drinking habits, driven to it, Jabe averred, by the nattering of his wife. However that may have been, in Nathan's drunken days Tatty was a model wife, patient and still-tongued, loyal to her husband, and ready to quarrel with anybody who spoke a word against the blacksmith. Everything that womanly ingenuity could devise was done by Tatty to shield her husband and preserve his character. During this time also she was most diligent at all the means of grace, took great interest in all chapel affairs, and prayed incessantly at class and prayer meetings for her husband's reclamation. After a while Nathan came to his senses, chiefly through the good offices of the Clogger and his friends. Tatty was, of course, greatly delighted and thankful, and Nathan was never tired of proclaiming how much he owed to the patience and kindness of his wife in his wild days. Gradually Nathan was drawn into church work, and as he could write better than most of his associates, he was installed chapel steward, which office he had held ever since. But as Nathan's zeal waxed warm, Tatty's grew cold. It soon required all Nathan's persuasive powers to keep her going to chapel at all. She ceased altogether to attend class and prayer meetings, and whilst willing for Nathan to attend the sanctuary, she ceased to see any particular reason for doing so herself. In course of time she discovered that Nathan had too much to do at the chapel. As they had no living children, she complained of her loneliness, and in swearing, nagging tones rated Nathan, saying again and again, " Tha'rt allis aat o' th' haase." The Clog Shop, however, became her most particular aversion. Its owner and his friends were denounced without measure or mercy, and though Nathan was one of the least regular visitors to this favourite village resort, he came in for more abuse about it than all the other transgressors put together. Nathan played the bass viol in the band, which of course brought that cherished institution into ill repute with his wife, and latterly the practice nights before the Sarmons had been times of tribulation for the blacksmith. More than once he had found the strings of his instrument cut when he reached it down from the joist to take it to the practice, and when on the third occurrence of the kind he bluntly charged his wife with doing the damage, she flew into a tantrum, flounced out of the house, and went away to Duxbury to her sister's. Poor Nathan, deeply attached to his wife and full of grateful memories of her bygone faithfulness, was perplexed and alarmed when she did not come home that night, and next morning he was at Duxbury by breakfast time, humbly begging Tatty's pardon, and coaxing her to come back again. But something of the same kind occurred again not long after, and Mrs. Nathan went off again, and since then, every little tiff, Tatty might be seen sitting like a statue at the far end of the coach on her way to Duxbury, and Nathan was certain to follow in a few hours or days at most, to get forgiven and bring her back. Of course, such proceedings soon became common property, and whenever Nathan's wife was absent from home, the blacksmith was quizzed by his customers at the smithy as to when he was going to fetch her back. Another element of difficulty between the two, and perhaps at bottom the cause of all the rest, was that they were childless. 3 of their 4 little ones had died in infancy, and the 4th, little Nathan, a wee fragile bit of humanity, lived to be about 4 years of age, and then quietly faded out. Some time before his death, however, Nathan had taken him into the smithy one afternoon against his wife's wishes, and whilst there the little fellow trod upon the head of a long shaft hammer, which tilted up quickly and struck the little fellow on the temples. He dropped on the floor like a dead thing, and Nathan, with a wild cry, snatched him up and carried him into the cottage. He soon recovered and seemed all right. The doctor, in fact, said that he was very little the worse, but as he died about a month after, although the doctor scoffed at the idea of the accident having anything to do with the child's decease, its mother evidently had her own opinion on the subject, and in moments of anger of late had darkly hinted that but for Nathan she might still have had one comfort in life. To a man pining for child love this was hard to endure, and on the day of the now notorious quarrel, Tatty, carried beyond all restraint, had openly charged her husband with responsibility for the death of the little one. Nathan, smarting with a sense of cruel injustice and white with indignation, lost all control of himself and struck his wife a sharp slap on the face, upon which Tatty had taken her usual excursion, adding this time the serious step of going to tell the minister. This and much more was told to the super as he sat toasting his shins before the Clog Shop fire, and by the time that Jabe had finished he had veered round decisively to Nathan's side of the question, and proposed to go down to the smithy and offer Nathan his sympathy, suggesting also that he should go and persuade Tatty to return home. " Yo' mun do nowt o' th' sort. Let her bide and come whoam when hoo's ready, and leave Nathan ta us. We'll pull him through, yo'll see." When the minister had gone, the two stewards fell into close consultation on the case in hand, and decided that this time, instead of avoiding the subject carefully out of respect to Nathan's feelings, they would wait their opportunity and persuade him to bring things to a crisis by letting his wife stay away until she came back of her own accord. 2 or 3 nights later Nathan sauntered into the Clog Shop in that restless, absent manner which always came upon him when his wife was away. Jabe, still at his bench, followed the blacksmith with his eyes as he passed up the shop, and having previously resigned his position of chief spokesman to Ben for this occasion only, he motioned to him that now was the time, and then turned round again and went on with his work with much unnecessary demonstrativeness. Ben silently handed his tobacco box to the newcomer. The two smoked on for some moments without speaking, and then Ben leaned forward out of the nook and said in a low voice, which was not quite so steady as it ought to have been —" We've been killing a pig. Wilt come and ha' thy dinner with us on Sunday?" Nathan's lip quivered, tears swam in his eyes, and he stared steadily before him without speaking. Ben took several long draws at his pipe, and then, touching Nathan gently on the knee, he said soothingly —" Every heart knoweth its own bitterness." Nathan seemed shaken by a sort of internal convulsion. He bent forward, propped his chin on his knees, and sat staring into the fire, whilst great tears splashed down upon the chip ashes at his feet. Jabe, at his bench, had suddenly stopped working, and was holding his breath to listen, though his eyes were still fixed on his work. Presently Nathan faltered —" Ay, bud, Aw do loike aar Tatty. Aw'll fetch her whoam i' th' morn." " Tha'll do nowt o' th' sort," shouted Jabe from his bench, and dropping further pretence of work, he threw down his hammer, and, unable any longer to keep out of the business, came and joined them at the fire, and plunged at once into hot discussion on the hitherto forbidden topic. Ben and he insisted that Nathan had made his own trouble by always being so anxious to get his wife back, that he would have no peace of his life until she was cured of this habit, and that as she was " a dacent woman enough i' mooast things," it was his duty to make one supreme effort to bring her to her senses. They prophesied that she would be sure to come back soon, and that, if once she had to come of her own accord, there would be an end to her vagaries, at any rate in that direction. Nathan took a great deal of persuading, and both his advisers realised that their task was only commenced, for, as Jabe said, the blacksmith would " tak' a lot o' keeping to it." And indeed he did. Lonely at home, save for the occasional presence of a girl who came to do the housework, He spent his evenings at the Clog Shop, and often when the rest had left for the night all the arguments had to be gone over again, and all the objections once more answered. Slowly Nathan settled down to a dogged endurance of his troubles, praying almost night and day that the Lord would forgive him for his part in the trouble, and soften the heart of his absent wife toward him. Meanwhile Tatty gave no sign, and as everybody avoided naming her to the blacksmith, he did not even hear the bits of news of her that did reach the village. It was reported at the Clog Shop that Tatty was looking " ter'ble bad," and whilst some of the cronies cried " Sarve her reet," Long Ben remarked softly, " Hoo'll be whoam afore lung, yo'll see." One night Nathan, heavy of heart and out of love with all the world, pulled the sneck out of his cottage door and strolled wearily towards his favourite resort. As he approached he heard a number of voices raised in animated discussion, and opening the door he came upon a rather odd scene. There on a clog stool behind the counter sat Lige, the road mender, with a face beaming with mystery, importance and delight, holding on his knees a bundle of old clothes containing a very young baby, and standing over him, scarcely less excited, were several others of the Clog Shop fraternity. " I were comin' whoam fro' my wark up th' Brogden Lone, an' Aw yerd it skriking i' th' hedge bottom," cried Lige, in answer to Nathan's look of amazement. " It'll be some poor wench's chance chilt, Aw reacon," said Long Ben, in pitying tones. " It's a bonny un, choose wot it is," said Jabe, with unwonted music in his voice, as he turned back the edge of the old Paisley shawl in which it was wrapped, and looked intently into its face. The child gazed up at him with owl-like solemnity, and then puckered its mouth as if it would have spoken if it could, and the hard, crusty, misogamous old Clogger beamed upon it with delight as he murmured —" Tha'rt tar pretty for a chance chilt." Just then Nathan came round the corner of the counter, and he bent down over the baby. After gazing at it a moment he stepped back, and surveying the little bundle of rags and humanity, he asked —" Wot art goin' ta dew wi' it, Liger ?" Before he could answer, Jabe broke in —" Aar Judy can tak' care on it ta neet, and i' th' mornin' Aw reckon it'll ha' ta be ta'n to th' bastile." There was a silence for a moment or two, every man looking a strong protest, but feeling that he could think of no better thing to do. " Has ony on yo ony idea whoase it is ?" said Nathan, still looking hard at the little one, which was just beginning to cry. " It's noabry's about here," said Sam Speck, who, through his sister Lottie, knew all the secrets of the village. " Then Aw'll have it," cried Nathan, and before Lige could object he had snatched the baby from his knee and was dandling it up and down to stop it crying. " Thee tak' it," objected Lige, taken aback, and not too pleased to be thus summarily robbed of his treasure. " Wi' thy wife ?" But he stopped, and could have bitten his tongue off as he remembered what he was saying. But Nathan took it up —" Ay, wife or noa wife, Aw'll tak' it. Aw mun ha' summat i' th' haase to talk to." Others were raising objections, but a new idea had evidently struck Long Ben, and motioning and winking at the rest, he gently encouraged Nathan in his purpose, and in a few moments a small procession started for the smithy, led by the blacksmith proudly carrying his new found joy. Arrived at the cottage, Nathan held the baby whilst Lige went upstairs to fetch the long disused cradle, and Sam Speck put a pan of milk on the fire to provide the little one with food. In a few minutes Long Ben turned up, bringing his buxom wife, who, after expressing lofty scorn of the blundering ways of menfolk, took the baby from Nathan, and after cuddling and kissing it, pulled out a bundle of old baby clothes, and soon had it washed, dressed, fed, and asleep in the cradle. When the others departed they left Nathan pulling the cradle string and humming " Rock of Ages," as he had done so often in the days gone by, and musing pathetically over his former experiences, now so vividly brought back to his mind. It was arranged that Mrs. Ben should fetch the baby presently for the night, until some other arrangement could be made. Nobody claimed the little one, and Nathan, to his great delight, remained in undisturbed possession of it. The baby came on famously, and crept so deep into Nathan's heart that Mrs. Ben began to fear it would take the place of absent Tatty. One night Ben was the victim of a severe curtain lecture, and next day being market day, Mrs. Ben set off in the coach to Duxbury. After doing her business, she made her way into a quiet part of the town, and in a few moments was sitting talking confidentially with Nathan's wife. Tatty, looking thin and pensive, made all sorts of inquiries about Beckside and its doings, but carefully avoided any reference to the smithy. Mrs. Ben tried several times to draw her, but it was of no avail, until at last, growing desperate, she blurted out —" Hast yerd wot yo'r Nathan's getten ?"" Neaw." " Whey, he's getten a babby." Tatty turned and looked with a long, wistful, sidelong glance at her friend, and then with a great sigh changed the subject, and could not be brought back to it. But Mrs. Ben knew what she was about, and next night after dark the tall wan form of Tatty Entwhistle might have been seen stealing down the darker side of the Beckside road toward the smithy. The blacksmith's shop stood sideway on to the road, and the cottage was behind it, facing into the smithy yard. Tatty stole quietly up amongst heaps of old iron, cart hoops, and disabled agricultural implements, and was soon at the side of the house. Nathan, manlike, had lighted the lamp, but had forgotten to draw the blind. Tatty drew softly near, stole along the house side until she was close to the window, and then, standing on a broken pulley which enabled her to see over the curtain, she peered round the corner of the window into the house. There sat Nathan in the rocking chair, with the baby in his arms, talking to it as he rocked it. Her heart smote her as she saw how thin her husband's face had become, but that pain gave way to another, of a quite different kind, as she saw how happy he seemed to be with the little one. It began to rain, but Tatty never felt it. Presently the baby dozed off, and Nathan put it into its cradle and made it cosy. The cradle stood where she could see all this, and as she watched there came into her eyes that hunger of child love which only a childless mother knows. Then Nathan took something down from the mantelpiece, and began to look earnestly at it, while the firelight flickered up into his face. It was a little glass photo of Tatty, taken at the last Brogden Wakes, and the watching woman almost cried out as she saw him looking at it so intently. Suddenly he fell to his knees with the likeness still in his hands, and though she could not quite hear what he said, yet the way he held up the little photo, as if showing it to his Maker, told her all she wanted to know. Then Nathan got up, and after glancing at the cradle, he put on his coat and went out. Tatty crept back into the shade of the coal house to avoid being seen as her husband crossed the yard. When she was sure he had gone, she stepped out of her hiding place, picked up a bit of old iron which she could see on the ground by the light through the window, and inserting it into the hole of the sneck, gently lifted the latch and went inside. The first thing she did was to go to the mantelpiece and make sure that it was her likeness that Nathan had been looking at. Then she turned to the cradle, half smiled as she noted how clumsily the baby had been put into it, and then, turning down the coverlet, she stood looking down on the sleeping infant. It was certainly pretty. What if it had crept into her place in Nathan's heart? Oh, what a fool she had been, and what a sinner too! But just then a step at the door made her start. A smothered exclamation told her that Nathan had returned, but she did not move. Her back was to him, but she felt he was looking at her. There they both stood for quite a long time, until at last, slightly turning towards him, she asked —" Whose is this babby, Nathan ?"" It's mine." " Tha'rt no its fayther." " Neaw, bud Aw'm goin' to be, if God helps me." There was a silence again for most of a minute, and then Tatty turned her back full upon her husband again, and dropping her head murmured —" Aw'll be its muther, if tha'll let me." Then she heard a sob behind her, felt herself being drawn down into a chair, and in a moment more was held fast in the tight, silent embrace of the now happy blacksmith. Hours after, as Nathan was picking up the cradle to carry it upstairs, baby and all, he noticed that the child's clothes had been changed, and it was wearing the nightgown of the little Nathan they had lost. As he made towards the staircase his wife said —" Has t' baby a name, Nathan ?"" Neaw, not yet." " Then we'll ca' him Nathan, shall us ?" And that was how Tatty Entwistle came home. CHAPTER VI